Hello and welcome to tonight's webinar arranged by the Center for Asian and Middle Eastern Studies. I'm your host, Naeem Mahmood. Tonight, we are to have the first of the great webinar with the title, 10 Years After Shahbag, Is Secularism in Crisis in Bangladesh? The aim of this webinar is to understand whether secularism or Islam is in crisis in Bangladesh. Our guest tonight is Ashraf Aziz Ishrak Fahim. Fahim holds a bachelor's degree in international relations from Mahidol University, Thailand. He is currently studying social and political thoughts at the University of Leeds, UK. His article on Inventing Islamism, de-Islamization under secular authoritarianism in Bangladesh was published in Science Open on 14 December 2022. We are indeed glad to have Fahim with us this evening. A few words about CAMES. The Center for Asian and Middle Eastern Studies, CAMES in short, is a non-partisan organization based in London, promoting activities to understand Asia and the Middle East better, and acts as a hub for engaging with the region's arts, culture, and politics. We engage through research and dialogue to facilitate a better understanding of these regions from socio-economic and political viewpoints. Recently, we have arranged a number of lecture series on terrorism, colonialism, the Ottoman Empire, and the civilizational studies. We have also arranged a number of webinars on the events unfolding in India, Libya, and Egypt. So that is the bit of overview and introduction of tonight's webinar. We are going to the main part now, but before that, I'd like to let you know that a bit of format of tonight's webinar. We'll start with the presentation from Fahim, which will last around 30 to 45 minutes. It will be then followed by comments and Q&A section, which will also last around 30 to 45 minutes. We are hoping to wrap up the whole session within 1 hour and 30 minutes. Just to let you know, we follow we observe some rules. We ask our audience to keep mic and mobile muted until told otherwise. We encourage questions and discussions maintaining professional approach. We also encourage attendees to take notes on the presentation for the comments and Q&A section. Now, without further ado, I'd like to ask Ishrak Fahim to make the presentation. Fahim, over to you. Let me end my share so that you can share your screen. Go ahead, Fahim.
Thank you, Naeem bhai, for your rather beautiful introduction. Just let me share the screen. Okay. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. This lecture that I'm about to deliver tonight is based on the article that I published in the Reorient Journal last year, titled, as Naeem bhai mentioned, Inventing Islamism, the de-Islamization under secular authoritarianism in Bangladesh. So this year, 2023, marks the 10-year anniversary of the momentous Shahbag movement that happened in 2013 in Dhaka, Bangladesh. After 10 years of Shahbag, we still have a discourse on secularism. It's a mainstream account of secularism in Bangladesh that tells a story in which secularism appears to be in crisis. So in this talk, I will make some attempts to try to convince you into believing that Muslimistan, a loosely defined term deployed here, including Bangladesh, has already been de-Islamized. Secularism is already there. The secularist politics present is now about further de-Islamization within a fundamentally de-Islamized or secularized polity. The suspension of democracy in 2013 and the talks of restoration of democracy that we are hearing for the past few years in Bangladesh are all in line with the secularist politics. So it is not beyond the Shahbag the Shahbag movement that we saw in 2013. So it's still a continuation rather than a departure from it. And I will also try to make the case that Islamism is here to stay, even if what we know as Islamism today is removed, is absent. A new thing will be labeled as Islamism for secularism, for secularism's own sake. So secularism cannot make a case for its own existence if it doesn't have an other, and that other is Islamism. And secularism will always be in crisis, be it in 2013, be it 2023, or be it 2123, it will always be in crisis. So when we have the discourse of a secularism khatre mein hai, a secularism in crisis, we can have this struggle for secularism ad infinitum. So we'll always have Islamism taking over the country, taking over the world, even if it is not. And we will see how that plays out. And we'll also have a secularism that is always in crisis, that is always in need of being implemented. So in the introductory part, I would like to talk a bit about what I call fundamental de-Islamization. You can alternatively call it fundamental secularization. This concept is built upon Charles Taylor's idea of a secular age. It is the title of his book that I believe was published in 2007. So in Charles Taylor's A Secular Age, Taylor says that the secular age doesn't mean that religion will go away, or what we consider religion will go away. In fact, an intensification of religiosity can be seen in processes that actually gear towards secularization. For example, if you recall, the Protestant movement in the West is considered as the birthplace in time of secularism. But we often fail to recognize that Protestant movement was actually a religious movement. And the Protestants, they were very deeply religious. They were so religious that they did not want to delegate the task of being religious to the church. They wanted to be religious on their own. They wanted to read the scriptures on their own. So they were more religious than most people today. So they were very literalist. They are very conservative in a way. So again, a very loaded term, conservative, but in today's parlance. But what is distinguishable in this secular age from the age before is that now you have a choice. Now you have a choice to be religious or to be against religion. You have a choice to choose between religions. You have a choice to choose religion or irreligion. Before the secular age, it was not a matter of choice. The religion, the religious order as it is called, was the natural order of things. I mean, the concept of being not religious was foreign. It was simply not possible. That subjectivity, that possibility did not come about. With this secular age, we now have that possibility. Now, this scholar named Dalakora, sorry, I may have pronounced her name wrong because of my Bangladeshi upbringing and whatnot. She is a professor at LSE. She has this article titled Muslim Brotherhood as a Phenomenon of Secular Age. She directly draws upon Charles Taylor's work to claim that Muslim Brotherhood displays all the symptoms of a product of a secular age, despite its claim to contrary. Another scholar, Shadi Hamid, he is with the Brookings Institution, a very prolific scholar that I have been following from my early years in academia, in undergraduate years. He writes that Islamism can make sense only when there is something that is not Islamism. In the Egyptian context, he says, Islamism needs Hassan al-Banna as much as it needs Gamal Abdel Nasser. So without Gamal Abdel Nasser, you cannot have Hassan al-Banna. So you have to have something that is not Islamism to be Islamist, and that is what secular age entails. I hope you can see how in a secular age, we already have entered into a terrain in which Islam is no longer, in the Muslim context, in Muslim Islam, no longer the default option. It has already been decentered. I call it fundamental de-Islamization. You might want to call it fundamental secularization. But there still remains a question. A couple of scholars may take some issues with this claim. For example, I would imagine that Ruhasin Abbasi, another prolific scholar, would claim that, well, pre-modern Muslims actually did distinguish between the religious and the secular, the dini and dunyawi distinction that we have within Islamic tradition. And Sherman Jackson, another American scholar, a very prolific one, I might add, he has this article which he also delivered, on which he also delivered a lecture at Georgetown in Qatar, titled Islamic Secular. While I do not disagree with the facts presented in both the papers, I would like to claim that these two scholars and those who argue in similar ways cannot show that making Islam as one of the many options was present in pre-colonial, pre-modern Muslim Islam. Secularism, the dini and dunyawi distinction may have still existed in pre-modern Muslim societies, but even then, the meaning of dini and dunyawi, as we understand in secular age, was probably not present. Secularism, the social epistemology, it was foreign. And this particular thing is important for my project, because if I cannot show that this formation of society and politics is foreign, is something novel, I cannot claim that there has been any fundamental de-Islamization. So, and I think there has been a fundamental de-Islamization because of this. Secularism is a social epistemology, and Islam being the ability to choose between Islam and non-Islam. You can't, so in pre-modern Muslim societies, there was no term as Islamism or Islamist. In fact, the term Islamiyun, from which we have the word Islamist, which actually originated in the Arab world in the early 20th centuries, because then the Muslims who were Islamists, they had to distinguish themselves from other Muslims who were not Islamists. So they were really puzzled about this. Well, we have so many Muslims who do not want to see Islam in the role that we want to see. So how do we deal with them? Do we simply say, well, they are non-Muslims? It was a very big thing to do, so many actually did refrain from doing that. So they coined the term Islamiyun, and they said, well, we are the Islamiyun and they are simply Muslims. In pre-modern Muslim Islam, it was simply not possible, because when everyone is quote-unquote Islamist, you simply do not have the necessity to invent or deploy the term. Now, when we talk about secularism or secularization in Muslim societies, it is very important that we understand that secularism is not a monolith. There are numerous variants of secularism in the world. And secularism, understood as a separation between the church and the state, the public and private sphere, separating religion from politics, this sort of introductory talks about secularism are not very helpful to understand how secularism actually operates in the real world. So, for example, secularism wants to separate religion from politics. Fine, but how do you do that if you do not know what religion is? So when secularism tries to separate religion from politics, what it ends up doing is defining, governing, regulating, dictating, and in fact, even producing religion. And in many cases, in the name of customs, laws, national culture, nation, secularism entails many of the functions, many of the traditions, many of the even colors of the dominant religious traditions. For example, in India or in the Indo-Pak subcontinent that we are from, that I'm talking, the region that we're talking about, if you ask someone, what is culture? What is the culture of this region? They will end up producing a definition of culture that is deeply grounded in Hindu scriptures, religious scriptures. But to them, these things, they are not religious anymore. They are simply presented as culture, and now, as such, could be imposed on those who are not from that religion because it has been nationalized. It has been removed from their religious origins. On the other hand, it also, in the very process, it also determines what secularism is and is not, what religion is and is not. So sometimes you may have a definition of religion that may not correlate perfectly with your idea, idea of faith or what you actually believe in. And this is another thing. For example, the term religion and what it means and what it does not mean is very modern. And many scholars have argued that, well, religion, in pre-modern times, we simply did not have any religion because the way we understand the term, it simply did not exist. There was no thing as separate as religion. For example, in Islam, we also have the notion that Islam is not a religion, instead it's a deen. So when Ruwasin Abbasi, for example, says that we still had a definition of a concept of dini and dunyawi, the religious and secular, in pre-modern Muslim societies, well, does dini mean religious here? So we still have that contention, right? The Western secularism and Indian secularism, well, even in the West, we probably have many secularisms. They have, in some ways, managed to merge the majoritarian tendencies, the values of majority, the religion of majority, with their secularism. In America, for example, you have "In God We Trust" as their national motto. It has been passed in their legislation. But, well, very few people would complain that America is not a secular country. In Britain, we have Christianity, or the variant of it, the Britain and the UK practices as the official religion. So as I was saying, and as we will see later, in France, we also have a French secularism in which Catholicism is very deeply merged in it. In Indian secularism, I have already given you an example of it. We also have a merger of the religious values and ethos, even custodian practices of the majority religion and secularism. But in Muslimistan, we have this phenomenon of Kemalism, and Kemalism, I would argue, is a variety of secularism that is exactly opposite of the secularisms that we have hitherto discussed. So this type of secularism, this specific type of secularism, is from above. We can call it elite secularism, and it is against the dominant religion of the community or of the land, that is Islam. Again, remember, when we call Islam is a religion, we already have gone through a massive process of secularization of our mind and the concepts that we deploy. So it is not just about secularization anymore. It is also about what type of secularization. And this is a very important thing to remember to better understand the topic at hand. So now I'm trying to give you a brief overview of the Islamist secularist divide in Bangladesh. Remember, it's not a history lesson, and I'm trying to very briefly give you a glimpse of the concept and how the meanings have shifted. It's not a lesson on facts, but rather a description or an attempt to describe how the representations of identities of different identity groups happened over time. So if you look in the activist circle and the literature that they produce, and also even the scholarly literature on Bangladesh, before the Pakistan era, you would see that Muslim League was considered a secular force. And Jamaat-e-Islami, founded by Maulana Abdullah Maududi, was the Islamist alternative to it. The contest, Muslim League was considered a secular force, and Jamaat-e-Islami, it actually opposed Muslim League's political agenda and many of its policies on the ground that, well, Muslim League is not Islamist enough, it's very secular. So Jamaat-e-Islami made that claim, and at times it even opposed the idea of Pakistan as it was presented, because it thought that Pakistan would be yet another secularist state. Basically a secular state composed of Muslims. And Maududi argued that what is the point of having a state of Islam? What is the point of ensuring the rights of Muslims if the rights of Islam are not ensured? And we'll briefly go into that territory. And my Professor Salman Saeed has argued that this is actually what happened. Eventually, Pakistan has now become yet another Kemalist state. But anyways, coming back to the point, in Pakistan era, and now the same Muslim League, remember, is still in place. Their policies have not changed. The persons are still the same. But now it is implicitly represented as an Islamist force. Sometimes communal, sometimes Islamist, the terms vary, but again, it's an Islamist force. Now the secular force is Awami League. It first emerged as Awami Muslim League, then it dropped the name Muslim from it. But right from the beginning, even when it had Muslim in its name, Awami Muslim League, the official name was Awami Muslim League, it was considered a secular force. And later it became even more secularized, dropped Muslim from its name, Awami Muslim League, Awami League, became Awami League, and it continued to be viewed as the secular force. In contemporary Bangladesh, Bangladesh Nationalist Party, we have a two-party political system in Bangladesh. Bangladesh Nationalist Party, BNP, it is considered pro-Islamist, at least in most accounts. And Bangladesh Awami League, BAL, the same party from the Pakistan era, it is considered pro-secularist. This is the rough depiction of the identities of parties in mainstream account. But some scholars, for example, Mubashir Hassan, then Ali Riyaj and Sultana Kamal, they have hinted at the possibility of BAL actually being an Islamist, closet Islamist party. And BNP obviously is Islamist. Mubashir Hassan goes the farthest. He claims that, well, everything in Bangladesh is Islamist. Ali Riyaj says that Bangladesh has undergone a process of nationalization of Islamism. Because, well, one of the reasons he gives is, every political leader in Bangladesh uses, inshallah, God willing, in his or her political address. So that is an obvious sign of secularism being absent. Remember, Awami Muslim League, it dropped the word Muslim from its name, and in Awami Muslim League, it is said that there were two factions within it. One was Islamist faction, the other was a secularist faction. The secularist faction was led by Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. Secularist faction came in control of Awami League, and they evicted the Islamist faction from the party, or from key political posts within the party. Now that Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, who was considered a secular a force of secularism in the Pakistan era, is described as somewhat Islamist in Bangladeshi context. Ali Riyaz, Sultana Kamal, both of them do that because, well, Sheikh Mujibur Rahman helped Bangladesh. He initiated the process of Bangladesh joining OIC, Organization of Islamic Cooperation. So one of the things, the sites as
can I ask a question?
I think we have a Q&A session.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, later, sir. Okay.
So the point I'm trying to make with all these examples is how the meanings of secularism and Islamism and the identities of secularists and Islamists are shifting over the years. And secularism and being secular is an impossible state. No one actually can become that. It's an ever-evolving process. And now we are having this argument that all of the things that we observe, all of the factors, actors we observe in Bangladesh, all of them are Islamist. I argue that this is because the way secularism has been banalized, and it is it has been made impossible a state to attain. We must always strive for secularism, but secularism can never be materialized in this mortal world. But the struggle for it must always continue. This never-ending march for progress as found in European Enlightenment. Ellen Oliphant finds this banality in secular France. If we can read the quotation that I have put here. When it comes to religion, Islam stands in relief as the marked against the unmarked secular French. Catholicism, by contrast, is equated with the secular France through practices that make it isomorphic with the history and culture of France and Europe. Catholic material forms, figures, and practices occupy monumental spaces in Paris. They rise above the skyline, and they provide the names of many of the streets, passageways, and metro stations. So, the Notre Dame Cathedral is not an affront to secular France, but a student wearing hijabis. So how does that happen? If you go to France, you will see Catholicism being present in French art, French history, French culture, in the names of the French streets, metro stations, and so on. But they claim that they're secular. So how is that possible? Oliphant ponders this question. And she comes to the conclusion that it is possible by Catholicism being banal. So you can never notice its presence. You can only notice its absence. But Islam, on the other hand, is the marked other. Catholicism is the culture. It's just the way it is. It's not religion. It's just, being French and being European. But Islam, well, that is religion. And religion must not interfere with politics, must not come into the public sphere. So we must deal with that. But Catholic stuff, well, that is how it is. Banality, Oliphant, by the way, Oliphant draws the concept of banality on Hannah Arendt's work. And banality here is not a position of weakness, rather it's actually a form of power to be able to conceal its provinciality and even presence. As such, secularism, if we apply the argument to the Bangladeshi context, is never present. It can only be absent. You never notice something that is so banal if it is present. We are not noticing that we are breathing air and we are full of air, but we will notice it if it somehow is not there. Islamism, on the other hand, is never absent. It can only be present because it's always marked. And Bangladesh can also never be secular enough. Mubashir Hassan, for example, writes in his 2020 book that even though Bangladesh had secularism as a principle enshrined in the constitution, it was not actually truly secular. Now, what comes to my mind is, well, what does true secularism mean then? But in the same book, he goes on to claim that everything from Awami League to BNP to Jamaat Islami, everything represents Islamism. Everything is Islamist. Bangladesh, Bangladesh itself is Islamist in a way. But how does that make sense? It makes sense because secularism is always wanting, and Islamism's marked nature makes it felt present. Having secularism as a state principle is not enough, but a very negligible mention of Islam in anywhere points towards Islamization of Bangladeshi society and politics. Secularism is always in danger. Secularism is always in crisis. Secularism khatre mein hai. And now, interestingly, Mubashir Hassan engages in secular takfir. One cannot become secular through self-proclamation. One cannot become secular by just being secular, whatever that may mean. One has to be accepted as secular by these ideologues, these scholars. And the never-ending struggle for secularism will continue. By the way, one thing that we have noticed from this discussion is that how we demarcate, how we categorize what secularism is, what a secular is, what Islamism is, and what a secular, what an Islamist is, these things, there are no facts based on which these identities are constructed. The identity construction is always very arbitrary. It differs from one temporality to another. And I would argue that these shifts in meanings and identities occur in line with the secularist politics. Secularism can determine who is who and what is what, according to its own needs and its never-ending march for progress, again enshrined in European Enlightenment. So first, we have seen that de-Islamization in a very fundamental sense, in a very deep sense, has already occurred with the advent of secularism/Islamism. We cannot have one without the other. Now, we will see how further de-Islamization occurs within a fundamentally de-Islamized society. So, de-Islamization after Shahbag. What happened? What is Shahbag? In February 2013, a section of Bangladeshi society occupied Dhaka's busy Shahbag intersection and demanded that war criminals be executed. By war criminals, they were basically referring to Islamist leaders. And what does the term war criminal refer to? Generally, it is presented as those who engaged in war crimes during the 1971 war of the war between Bangladesh and Pakistan. But it is never the case that the war crimes committed on part of the Bangladeshi forces or pro-Bangladeshi forces. It always denotes those who probably not even committed war crimes, but opposed the creation of Bangladesh and were with the Pakistan idea of Pakistan military. It's a very wide-ranging term. Again, the construction of the identity of war criminal or war crime is probably, it would merit another discussion, but very important to remember. Some of the demands that were made by Shahbag is included that Islamism be banned. Interestingly, some even marshaled Islamism or what could be called Islamism or even Islam for going after Islamism. And although Shahbag eventually helped Awami League in the process, in the political field, it was actually originated in a way that presented itself as against Awami League. So the argument was that Awami League and Islamists were in bed together. They hatched a conspiracy by which Awami League was letting the Islamist leaders go free. The BNP, on the other hand, its stand on Shahbag was also ambiguous. Sometimes it opposed it, sometimes it seemed to support it because partly Shahbag was also framing itself in a way that it is in opposition to Awami League. So a bit of ambiguity there. And there are lots of different arguments about what Shahbag actually was, who went there and who did not go there, what a Shahbagi is or what a Shahbag is not, a very big debate. But we can refer to this statement by an economics professor at Dhaka University, who is also a senior leader of the first secularist Communist Party of Bangladesh, CPB. This professor by the name M.M. Akash, in his 2015 opinion piece, outlines, in my view, a very succinct and impressive summary of the Shahbagi project. What he says is the following: come what may, progressive pro-liberation forces, aka secularists, should not obstruct Awami League's attempt to weaken and exhaust reactionary terrorist forces, aka the Islamists, by unleashing the brute force of the state on them. At the same time, secularists should continue their struggle against Awami League's reconciliatory approach, possibly towards Islamists, corruption, unnecessary excesses, and fascist tendencies, so that in a future election, both the ruling party and the opposition are from the pro-liberation, aka secularist camp. So what is interesting is that the Shahbagis, they are not necessarily with Awami League. Their contention is not with anti-Awami Leaguers either. The problem is that there is an Islamist elephant in the room that needs to be removed. And for that, they're willing to help Awami League in any way, shape, or form. But once that threat is removed, once we have a political system in which both actors, at least the prime actors, are from the same secularist camp, now we can call for democracy. Remember what is happening today, and we'll come back to that later. So I argue that there are three overlapping stages of the Shahbag project. These stages are overlapping because, as we shall see, it's not very easy to clearly distinguish one stage from the other. There is a very great degree of overlap. The stages are suspension of democracy to safeguard the Kemalist nation building project. Second, coercive social engineering under secular authoritarianism. And thirdly, restoration of democracy. As we shall see, the calls for suspension of democracy might be seen in the second stage or in the third stage, and the restoration of democracy can also come in the form of suspension of democracy. It's a very interesting phenomenon, as we shall see. So, suspending democracy. In 2014, 5 January election, national election, it was boycotted by BNP and its main political ally at that time, Jamaat Islami. The Awami League won more than half of the parliamentary seats uncontested. And it was the support for Awami League from the secularist camp was overwhelming. And what was the rationale for that? Foreign Camellia, who has over 90,000 followers on Facebook now, describes the reason in the following manner. When the opposition party is Jamaat, I do not want democracy. If BNP abandoned Jamaat, I would certainly not have accepted this farcical election. Sometimes one has to accept small crimes to prevent bigger ones. I'm surrendering my right to vote to defeat Islamist traffickers. So if the Islamist comes to power through election, then that election is actually problematic. In fact, a sound theoretical argument can also be made in that regard. It could be argued that Islamists are actually clouding the judgment of the voters in various ways. So voters are making the wrong choice because they are uneducated, they are poor, and so on, so superstitious. So suppressing them is actually liberating them, that sort of argument. But again, that was the rationale. So suspending democracy, it was the first stage of Shahbag that happened in 2013, in the later days of 2013. One scholar, Binayak Shen, he's an economist, he called for return to the democratic process. I think it was in January 2014. He said that, well, we need democracy. But in the same article, in the same opinion piece, he also argued for the exclusion of Islamists from the democratic process. So the restoration, the calls for restoration of democracy can also come in the form of calls for suspending democracy. It may not look like that, but it is. So what we have here is an implementation of Farid Zakaria's illiberal democracy thesis. I think it is in 2003 that he published his book titled Illiberal Democracy, in which he said, well, too much democracy is bad because it produces illiberal outcomes. Maybe we need to contain democracy a bit so that liberalism is safeguarded. Now, what interests me about the whole discussion is that in the secularist literature, we have this idea of sequentialism. In the Egyptian context, for example, Amr Hamzawi, he has summarized this argument about sequentialism in his book chapter. So the argument about sequentialism goes this way: well, democracy is not for people of the region because democracy should come only after certain things, for example, economic development and so on. So because the people are so poor, destitute, and so on, they are not actually fit for democracy. So and the political forces, they are reactionary and so on. So if we give them democracy, it will only create chaos. Now, what is interesting in the Bangladeshi context is we have a two-party system. Both parties are, broadly speaking, secularist. compared to the Middle Eastern countries. So BNP and Awami League, neither of them has an Islamist root comparable to the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, to AKP in Turkey, to Ennahda in Tunisia. But still, BNP is considered as from Islamist to pro-Islamist, and even BAL's Awami League's secular credentials are under question. Now the question is, when will the sequence be complete? Can it ever be complete? And I would argue that it cannot be. Post-Islamist state is an impossible state to attain. Today's post-Islamist is tomorrow's Islamist. Today's secularism is tomorrow's Islamism, and secularism must be found somewhere else. And the balance between secularism and Islamism should also be found somewhere in between. So in the second stage, the social engineering stage, I have identified 6 patterns, but I would not argue that these are the only patterns that you can observe. The 6 patterns that I have identified are as follows. So, erecting a secular alternative to the ruling authoritarian secular party. Once you have a secular authoritarian government in place, because you have to safeguard secularism from the chaotic forces of democracy, now you have to create a secular alternative to the ruling secular party. Because, as M.M. Akar said, in a future election, we'll have the government and the opposition from the same camp, that is secularism. Secondly, you have to ensure that only secularists can oppose the regime without suffering any meaningful consequences. So the opposition to the regime should be a secularist monopoly. So you have to also gradually change what it means to be Islamist, to the point where what being a secularist meant before will instead signify being an Islamist today. If you remember, Muslim League was the secularist force in pre-Pakistan era. In Pakistan era, it became Islamist, quote-unquote Islamist force. Now, even Awami League secular status is not safe and secure. So the room for further secularization is always there. You can never be secular enough. And remember, secularism's purity also has to be retained. It's also another concern for the secularists. So what can they do? They can explain the regime's authoritarian turns through its supposed Islamist turn. And that's how they retain the purity of secularism and the secularists. And remember, this supposed Islamist turn does not have to be there. Secularism, as I have already explained, it can invent, dictate, produce Islam even in its absence. And I would like to use a bit of vulgar words. So even if a male Bangladeshi youth faps to the pornography produced by a Pakistani porn star, it can still be considered Islamization of Bangladeshi society. It's possible, theoretically speaking, although whether or not it will be the case, we have to see yet. I hope it doesn't become that, but anyways. Fifth, at some point, as we shall see, secularism, the secularists find it increasingly difficult to manage, to retain their purity, to retain their image, the moral high ground. So they also include fringe Islamists sporadically in a way that they do not actually have any say over the trajectory of the country. But the secularists gain the illusion of inclusivity. And finally, this is the point to which I will like to focus a bit more, is the secularists will project secular policies as default neutral policies to be implemented, no matter which type of government is in power. So as such, if you see that a secularist force is collaborating with the regime, For example, for women empowerment, feminism is a tool in their arsenal. And if you say, well, this is a despotic government, so why are you collaborating with them? They will say, well, this is not for any partisan cause. We are just doing thing that is universal, that should be done, regardless of which type of government is in power. Even if it was the Pinochet regime, we would do that because, well, it's not partisan. It might or might not be the case. But if any Islamist tries to do that, he or she will be characterized as a fascist enabler, because Islamist policies and Islamist concerns are carefully provincialized, and any consideration or adoption of such policies or concerns is considered a collusion between Islamists and the regime. The secularists cannot collude with the regime, but Islamists can always, and they will, they are. So that's the argument. So the effects of the social engineering can already be seen in Bangladesh today. We already have a BNP without Islamists. Kamal Hossein, a secular apostle, has taken over the BNP-led coalition prior to the 2018 national elections. And although Kamal Hossein is not featuring prominently BNP right now, but lots of observers and political activists are concerned that or witnessing that BNP nowadays are distancing itself from their Islamist allies. But despite this, what could be called the Islamization of BNP, BNP is still termed as Islamist. Remember how the shift occurs, and the identity construction is not based on any fact. It's always imagined, it's always a representation. So what was secular yesterday is today considered as Islamist. And now the balance between secularism, so if you find a centrist, in Bangladesh, he would always engage in a balancing act, but he will take the identities for granted without questioning how these identities come about. So he or she might attempt to find a balance between, well, let's try to accommodate both of your concerns. But this pseudo-balancing act would result in a false balance between an Islamism that might was secularism a couple of years ago and secularism of today. Another thing we might have already noticed when I was discussing M.M. Akarsh's theory, and also briefly touched upon Binayak Sen's idea of democracy, Islamists are outside the demos, their notion of demos. So democracy considers is comprising of two parts, demos and kratos. So demos means people, kratos means power. So people, the rule of people is democracy. The demos, Islamists do not feature in their imagination of demos. So they want people to rule, but they do not consider Islamists to be within that group that we call demo people. This labeling Islamists as fascist enablers and seculars as being the opposition instead of being in bed with the regime, this politics of representation is very nicely summarized by this young Dhaka-based activist called named Tuhin Khan. He writes, I have translated this piece, it was in Bangla. When Islamist Hifazats stays quiet about the authoritarian rule, they are actually in a negotiation with the government. He is saying, the secularists negatively portray this negotiation to cast a doubt on Islamist morality and ask the government to sever ties with them. Everyone negotiates with the government, but when Islamist Hifazat does that, it becomes a problem, as they then receive the government's blessing. Madrasa students get recognition, the ulama gain clout in government, and those who culturally prefer Islam are empowered. As such, you secularists get distanced from the government. That is why Islamist Hafazat then gets branded as fascist enablers. But if Islamist Hafazat takes to the street, you become fearful of an Islamist Hafazat takeover. Consequently, you oppose them even if they oppose the regime. So the Islamists are now in a double bind. If they oppose the regime, the secularists will only be too happy to empower the regime to crush them. Now, and the Islamists, if they cooperate with the regime, well, they are the fascist enablers, so now we must have democracy. So democracy or not, Islamists are always crushed. So this social engineering process ensures that mobilizing against authoritarianism from what is considered an Islamist perspective is impossible. And it also describes Bangladesh's poor performances through its Islamist credentials. So, well, if Bangladesh is corrupt, that's because Bangladesh is Islamist. And if Bangladesh is successful, that is in spite of Islamism or because of secularism. So Bangladesh's success story, that's because of BRAC. Bangladesh's failure story, that's because of Hafazat and Jamaat. I'm trying to paint a caricature here, of course, not to be taken literally. Now we have come to the point of restoration of democracy. That's the third stage of the Shahbagi politics. In this stage, the Shahbagis realized that, well, if we are being this exclusive and this cooperative with the regime that is cracking down on everyone, not only Islamists, but also sometimes even Shahbagis, you cannot, so basically, once you create a Frankenstein, you cannot always control it, right? So they offer an they offer an inclusivist or pluralist framework. So they include Islamists without including Islamism. Now, it happens, so you might have a secular establishment and they may hire an Islamist. And they would claim that, well, we are inclusive. We have Islamists in our rank. But Islamism is not an ethnicity, right? How can you have an Islamist if that Islamist doesn't work towards Islamist political project that is fundamentally different from the political project that we find in European Enlightenment? So Islamism is treated as an ethnicity, so thereby producing a new Islamism, and the fight against anti-Islamism is based around that invented Islamism. And we can see this in the context of Islamophobia as well. Islam is treated as an ethnicity in the West, and the fight against Islamophobia is based around that Islam, which is basically considered an ethnicity. And Abdul Hakim Murad, for example, has taken an issue with that. The fascist Islamist caricature, we have already discussed this, and this also, the textbook controversy, another emerging Bangladeshi scholar, Muhammad Abdul Rakib, he has demonstrated how this works. So it shows that the textbook controversy, in mainstream account, this is an example, a very good example of Islamists collaborating with the authoritarian regime. So the narrative goes like this. The Islamists demanded that some anti-Islamist or secularist texts be removed from the textbook, school curriculum, and the regime complied. Now, if you just scratch a little bit, if you scratch the surface a little bit, you will find that, well, this is not actually what happened. What happened was the secularists, they changed the textbook first with they collaborated with the same regime to change the textbook first to include the text that they preferred, and to exclude many texts that, well, they were not even Islamist in the sense they were sometimes narrating the Muslim experience. Some of the poems included those written by Hindus, but perhaps admired Mughal kings, for example. But then again, they have the right to determine what is Islamic and what is not, as we have seen. So they changed the textbook first, and the Islamist, the Hafazat, Islamist group Hafazat, noticed that in a later, and they demanded that, well, this change be reversed. And now when the regime changed back the text, changed the textbook back to its previous state, the secularists went berserk. They claimed that, well, this is the collaboration between the Islamists and the regime. So the regime is bad.
Fahim, sorry, can I interrupt you a little bit? You've got 5 more minutes to wrap it up, please. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. So here we can see that they have already concealed their collaboration with the regime, because, well, their collaboration is not actually collaboration, it is actually progress, but Islamist collaboration is always collaboration. There is always banner, Islamists is always marked and very visible, in a very intrusive sense. So this is the last thing that I would like to touch upon. So what happens after de-Islamization? Abdullah Al-Aryan has recently, not recently, perhaps a couple of years ago now, wrote this opinion piece. I think it was published in Middle East Eye. The title of the opinion piece was, well, either it was a title or it was a sentence in that piece, the end of political Islam as we know it. And he was talking about Ennahda in Tunisia and Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. Well, he is probably right, and I would argue that he is. But remember, Ennahda was toppled in 2021, and toppling of Ennahda was still considered as a move against Islamism. AKP in Turkey has long departed from its so-called Islamist past, but the battle against AKP is still framed in a secularist Islamist divide. So the political Islam as we know it might be dead, but political Islam itself cannot be dead, because you cannot have secularism if you don't have an enemy. I mean, what secularization would look like if you don't know what to remove? To remove, the part that you need to remove is Islamism, political Islam, and that's why you need it for the purpose of the secularist project. So political Islam is dead. Long live political Islam. And post-Islamism, scholars like Aziz Bayat have advocated for this. I would argue that this is an impossible state. Today's post-Islamism is tomorrow's Islamism. Secularism is always in khatre. Secularism khatre mein hai. We need to save it. We need to act. We need to protect secularism from Islamist threat. And that is what is happening. That is the state of secularism in Bangladesh today, in my view. So to recap, we already have a fundamentally de-Islamized Bangladesh. Within this fundamental de-Islamization, the meanings of Islamism and secularism are in constant flux, shifting in a way that suits the secularist politics. The banality and universality of secularism makes us only feel its perceived absence. On the other hand, the markedness and provinciality of Islamism make us feel only its perceived presence, never the other way around. And Islamism is here to stay because secularism needs another to justify its own being. Secularism hamesha khatra mein hi rahega. Thank you.
Thank you, Fahim, for the nice presentation. I think it has been very helpful for you. And the title has been very clearly presented throughout your presentation. Now, we will go to Q&A and with comments as well. I hope our audience have taken notes and are prepared for the session. Please feel free to raise your hand in the hands so that we know if you have any questions. Also, pose a question to the chat as well. So, Okay, Naeem Malik, could you please unmute yourself and go ahead, please?
Okay. I think it was an impressive presentation and, well, worth listening to anyway. I may have some disagreements with it. And I think one of the first things I would have liked to see is a definition of what it means secular and what is secular. Okay. So secular, as I see it, is a property of an object. And in this case, is the property of a state. Okay. So a state can be surrounded by churches, all right, and it can still be secular because it is agnostic in how it deals with issues. And it is designed actually to deal with the modern day problems, not the medieval problems, because in medieval days that didn't exist because the state was ordained by God. And then, you can't have anything but religion. And everybody accepted their position. But today it's very different because it is a democracy, and in that democracy, you can have people of different faiths living together. There has to be something which will actually keep everybody happy. So, I think, so in that sense, I think that's probably what is needed. But it does not mean that secular only exists where there is Islam. It also exists in non-Islamic countries. So, for example, India claims to be the secular state, at least before Modi took over, right? And in that subcontinent also, we were presented with the same problems about how religion can actually be used to create communal violence, and that needed to be changed. And I think we can argue against secularism, but what we would need to do is to present what is the solution to those particular problems. And also, I think putting everything together in one basket, say everything is secularism and everything is the same, doesn't really help us in solving those problems. So I think what I like to hear is what is the definition of secular? What is secular? Is it a state that is secular? Is it a person that is secular? Because persons can have a faith and a very strong faith, but they can be secular in how they deal with other people on a social level. So I think that's what I would need some clarity on.
Very interesting, Naeem Malik. Thank you for your thoughts. Fahim, do you like to share something?
Yeah. So I think there are two parts to your question. The first part is relates to the definition of secularism that you are warranting, and the second part is about your idea of secularism. So I will take them one by one. So the first thing is I will not and try not to give a definition of secularism, because the whole purpose of my endeavor is to show how it is constructed and the meanings of it shift over time. So it's a construction, and these are not based on any fact. There cannot be any definition of secularism or even Islamism for that matter. So, for example, from Egypt, we have this scholar named Ali Abdul Razzaq, who argues for secularism from an Islamic point of view. So what secularism says is that religion cannot interfere in politics, right? But when Ali Abdul Razzaq makes the claim that Islam should not enter into politics, he is coming from a very religious view, and his views are propagated in the public sphere. Well, that's intrusion of religion in politics, in public sphere. So is Ali Abdul Razzaq an Islamist then? But he is not. So how can we define who is an Islamist and who is not? Well, very arbitrary thing. That's my argument. So I will not offer a definition because I simply cannot. My whole argument is that the meaning of secularism and of Islamism, they shift there. So secularism has the monopoly over categorization, and it can call anyone anything it wants. So it differs from temporality to temporality, as I say. The second thing is, well, it is impossible to separate religion from politics. You can see with the example of Ali Abdul Razzaq. So if he argues that religion, Islam does not have any business in politics, he's coming and he is quoting Quran and Hadith to that end. And if his view is propagated in public sphere, well, that's Islamism for you.
No, not
but
really.
Is it? But so this is the case that Talal Asad and others have made. So to protect religious freedom, to separate religion from politics, you first have to define what religion is. And there's a very interesting court case. Sullivan, he is a professor of religion in an American university. He was asked as a consultant for that case. So it was about a graveyard in an American city. So those people who were buried in the graveyards, their relatives put some religious objects on their tombstones, okay? But the city corporation said that these objects cannot be there. And the relatives claimed that they were motivated by religion to put them. So they believe this is their religion. And this resulted in a court case, the dispute. And the judge now had to determine what religion is in order to protect religious freedom. So now a secular judge in a secular court trying to determine what your religion is, if what you believe to be religion is actually religion. So this is the dilemma. And you said that, okay, well, we had secularism before at least Modi came. Well, did you? Zehra Mehdi, for example, she is a doctoral student at Columbia. And she has written this opinion piece. Why do secularists see Hinduism as culture, but Islam as religious? So if you wear bindi, tip in Bangla, is it religion or culture? Secularism has the monopoly on categorizing things. In Dhaka University, we're having this debate. So they have celebrated Saraswati Puja. But a few days ago, an Islamic organization organized a seminar, and Dhaka University VC retaliated by saying that, well, university is not the place for engaging in religious activities. It's for educational purposes. But Saraswati Puja, well, it's not actually religion, it's culture, right? So I have tried to discuss this in my presentation as well. So I think that there is a problem with how we understand secularism. The taken for granted assumptions about secularism, they need to be challenged, I think.
Okay, thank you, Fahim. I think that was a well elaborated answer. I'm going beyond the academic discourse and debate about what secularism is, what Islamism is. If you look at the current politics in Bangladesh, how the government is in, the only party is in power, and how do you consider this regime? Do you think although you mentioned it in your presentation that Bangladesh Awami League is part of the secular movement, but do you consider that Awami League is part of the movement that is leading the way of de-Islamization in Bangladesh?
Well, I would argue that in a way it's a bit loaded question because we still do not have account of secularism and Islamism. So if we don't know that, how can we say that what is for secularism or what is for Islamism and what is for de-Islamization and what is for Islamization, right? So I would instead say that the meanings of secularism and Islamism are shifting in a way that is fueling further de-Islamization of Bangladeshi society and politics within a fundamentally de-Islamized society. So whether Awami League is leading that, I would not consider that position because sometimes we place too much emphasis on the state itself and the state power. But as we have seen in the presentation that those who had the state power were supported, not only supported, but also coerced in a way, if you would like to call it, to go into the direction that Bangladesh ultimately took. So Gramsci, for example, makes a distinction between the political society and civil society. So the civil society's role is something that we need to scrutinize more.
Okay. But the reason de-Islamization, the part of the core argument, well, Awami League is fundamental kind of secularism, right? But the recent attempts, for example, some of the initiative it has taken, building up more than 550 mosques, model mosque in Bangladesh, for example, and other initiatives such as the number of Hajj pilgrimage has doubled almost, from 2023. From this year, it's going to be doubled. So there are kind of a lot of, and very interestingly, one of his ministers, for example, Mahmoud Hassan, Minister of Information in the government, participated in an Islamic conference, and he said that his government, which is the Awami League, is working for Islam in Bangladesh. So in that sense, I mean, isn't it fair to say that the Awami League is actually is working for Islam in Bangladesh? At least this kind of information tells us so. What's your take on that?
Well, two things. First one is secularism has the ability to produce religion, not only religion, but the right religion. Hatem Bazian, a pioneer in the field of Islamophobia studies, he calls this Islamophobia in Muslim majority countries. For example, secularists in Muslimistan will say that, well, this is Islam, this is the correct Islam, and that Islam is what their preferred version of it is. For example, they would say that, well, Madina Charter says secularism is the way. So they will tell you what your religion is. So if Awami League is building mosques, it is not in contradiction. It is not in contradiction with their secular principles. Kemal Pasha, he established Diyanet, the Minister of for Religious Affairs in Turkey. So is he an Islamist then? For the purpose of regulating religion, you also have to invest in religion. This person, Bangladeshi author Muhammad Zafar Iqbal, that I study, he in fact laments Bangladeshi secularist elites' disinterest in religion because of their disinterest, mullahs have the control over religious discourse. He says, if secularists took an interest in religion, then the secularists could produce the religious discourse in a way that fits them. So if Bangladesh Awami League is producing mosques, so what? Sorry, I forgot how to pronounce his name, Peter Mendeville or something, and Shadi Hamid, they produced a report for Brookings titled Islam as a Statecraft, in which they have shown very clearly how virulently anti-Islamist figures and actors use Islam to advance their own otherwise un-Islamic or anti-Islamic and anti-Islamist policies. The same argument is put forward by Usama Al-Azmi when he says, well, the Islamist, and I have also been discussing this, is Ali Abdul Razak an Islamist? Because, well, he obviously gives fatwa that is propagated in the public sphere, but he is not an Islamist, right? You have Ali Goma, the head of Al-Azhar, I believe, the Grand Mufti. Sorry, I probably have conflated the two positions. But anyways, you have Ali Goma, who is giving fatwa against Muslim Brotherhood. Is he an Islamist then? Because he is giving a religious fatwa that has political implications. So things are more complicated than that, I would argue, for the first part. And for the second part, I think this goes directly to the concept of banality that I'm trying to introduce here. So what is the big deal if Hassan Mahmoud attended this convention of an Islamist party? How many times do you have registered and a minister meeting a secularist party or secularist civil society force? It doesn't register in your mind. It doesn't register in your mind as an outstanding event. But you can recall every time a minister has met an Islamist, because that is marked, the other is not. So Islamism is always too easy to find, but secularism is, well, it's always banal, it's always the way, it's always the way it is, right?
In Bangladesh, I think the things are a bit complex. You know, the politics, my understanding is, you know, the clash that happened between the Hafazat and the government, the sole topic that we are talking about. Sometimes we, mix things up. For example, that you know, Islamic parties or Islamist or Islamism is the one side, and the rest is you know, rest of the parties or rest of the politics or rest of the people are just opposite of Islam. I think this is kind of a bit black and white drawing kind of stuff that really doesn't necessarily represent the whole picture. But anyway, before going to further discussion, let me allow Saif and Fuad to have their comments. Fuad, go ahead. Saif, I'll come to you next. Fuad, unmute yourself, please.
Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum assalam.
Thanks for your talk, bro. You know, Allah keep you safe and getting wiser with every day. I think the contribution has definitely put some colors on the way I think of the political ecosystem of Bangladesh. You know, it's about time we had a bit more light on these issues. Couple of questions. One, why do you think it's taken so long for this kind of reflection on the dynamics of the secularist Islamic divide to even start in public? And you know, good luck in your attempts to. It's really, really hard to even clear your throat when talking about Bangladesh, because there are so many entangled layers and webs, and no incentive really to talk things through and develop ideas in the open, especially if you aim beyond secularism, right? And two, can you think of any civil society jiu-jitsu moves that we could pull over the next couple of years as this election drama, observers, performative nonsense, the next phase of it continues? Because I think it's really good. We've got some good ideas now, and so might be able to protect people and make better use of each other's time, because a lot of really talented brothers and sisters have lost their lives and resources bashing their heads in a Newtonian fashion against this secularist brick wall in Bangladesh.
Go ahead.
So
Fine.
to take your first question, why did it take this long? Well, I don't have any concrete or completely convincing answer to that, but I would like to attempt to answer this question anyway. So I think there is global Islamophobia, obviously, and then you have the local version of it. You have also Hindutva, not only in its crudest form, that is the rise of BJP, but also soft variant that is practiced by Congress, especially that is manifested in epistemic Hindutva. You know, so Hinduism is culture, Islam is religion, things like that. And you also have the incompetency factor within the Islamists, quote unquote, again, a very constructed identity. And Islamists, sometimes those who are considered Islamists, sometimes they even lack the motivation to challenge the status quo. I think they have also undergone a process of lumpenization. They're just here in for better opportunity, anti-discrimination, but not so much about imagining a different political possibility or imagining a different world. So that bit might also have helped, contributed. Secularism, I should remind you that it has an amazing power to co-opt forces. So when you become an Islamist, you automatically become entrapped in a secular world, as I have tried to demonstrate. So even sincere attempts at dismantling secularism eventually result in reinforcing the secular world. So there is that bit as well. And again, secularists will also try to lure you into cooperating with them so that you can give them the aura of inclusivity by, so they will probably give you a job and a scholarship, social prestige and things like that. So that might also help you lose some motivation. The second question, I don't know actually what civil society moves that we can make, but if we can create an incentive structure around our activities, I think that will help. So if we can say, okay, well, if you are critical of secularist politics in Bangladesh, you can write an article on it, and it will be published in an academic journal, and you can put that in your CV, and it can help you get, I don't know, maybe get into graduate programs, polish your profile, things like that. So it can probably incentivize people, but again, it's a long game. We have to create an incentive structure, and we have to make people realize that, well, it's possible to imagine a different reality, and it's not a crime to do so.
Right. Let's go to Saif. Saif, unmute yourself, please, and make a question.
Yeah, assalamu alaikum, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Yes.
we hear you.
Okay, brilliant presentation, Fahim. Thank you very much for the presentation and the brilliant paper. The paper is superb. You're absolutely right in saying that Islamism has to be constructed in the post-colonial Kemalist nation states for the survival of Kemalist secular nation state or secularism and the whatever the modern nation state. So here a couple of things, couple of points I would like to raise. One of them is secularism is an anthropocentric hegemonic position, and it is always, in being that, it is always unstable. And in the attempt to achieve stability, it needs crutches. And within Kemalist nation state, it is Islam, or the wrong kind of Islam, or in secular parlance, they transformed it into Islamism, right? Here we should keep in mind that since its inception, secularism cannot but see Islam as a preemptive troublemaker, a perpetual threat to its hegemony, an attempt to translate this anthropocentric hegemony or sovereignty from white man and woman to God. That is, Islam is an attempt, a threat to do this, dislocate this power from white man / woman to God. And Islam, with its normativity, is the problematic ghost haunting the Western modernity. And you can see this, how there is a repeated attempt to make performity of Muslims into normativity of Islam. That is, what Muslims do becomes Islam. So Islam doesn't have any normative core. Whatever Muslims do is Islam. But this all is from the perspective of Western modernity, and which is very important, which you are highlighting, or secular position, which is always attempting to legitimize and maintain its and extend its hegemony. Now, here I would like to hear your thoughts on how Muslims in Bangladesh, particularly, and in wider Hind or Muslimistan, who are centered in Islam as a universal system of meaning and emancipation for Muslims and all humanity, can challenge and decenter the hegemony of Western modernity. It would be really interesting if you can give us some of your thoughts, or better, if you can go on and write another brilliant paper on that. So may Allah Pak give you more sort of guidance and more knowledge. We need scholars like you, definitely. Thank you.
So before trying to answer your question, that is rather complex, and perhaps it would require another webinar of sort. I would like to add, I do not disagree with what you said in the premise on which you built your question, but I'd like to add something to it. It's not only Islam that is considered as a threat to secularism, and as the first person to ask the question in the Q&A session mentioned that secularism is not only in Muslimistan, we can see it in other parts of the world as well. So increasingly, even in the West, we are seeing the tension between the secular and the religious. Well, John Locke in his day was probably the most secular person one could have imagined. But if he wrote his social contract theory in today's world, would he be considered as secular? So the conservative, the imagination, the idea or image of conservative conservatism that we have in the West is actually classical liberalism. That is basically the forerunner of secularism, secular force. So again, the meanings of secularism and religion are shifting even in the West, and this is probably a new battlefield between what is considered secularism and what is considered as religion. And Shadi Hamid is already working on it, and he says many parallel between what is unfolding in the US and what happened in Egypt. So we have yet to see what happens ultimately, but I think there are certain similarities. And now to your question, well, I have to disappoint you. I don't actually have an answer.
I guess Saif has another question. Go on, Saif, and then we'll wrap up the session.
Well, I hope that you don't disappoint us for very long. You would come up with some sort of some further ideas, inshallah. So taking up just the point, extending to your what you have been saying, someone wrote in the comment section that between two particular positions, the more sort of more Islamic, less secular position is gradually transformed into an Islamist position over a period of time. And this you mentioned in your talk as well several times, beautifully highlighted. So extremely important to keep that in mind, that secularism in itself is always being changed. What I would like to say here is that we have, I mean, this obviously needs a bit more exploration, that Islam, how secularism sees Islam is in some ways unique. For example, we do not see secularism vis-a-vis regarding Brahmanism, which is wrongly called Hinduism, with the same sort of stance as it sees, with the same sort of gaze as it sees Islam. Similarly, or Buddhism. For example, you can be a secularist and you can be a nice, a Buddhist believing in whatever, in nirvana or 1000 levels of whatever sort of different lives and so on. There is no problems with that. But when it comes to Islam, there is a particular gaze, there is a particular stance, right? And you can see this in Hindutva, which you in one of your answers you pointed to, that now the BJP and RSS are claiming that they are the real secularists
exactly,
in India, right? So why are they talking that? Why are they taking this particular mantle? They are taking this particular mantle because they're not taking this mantle because they have this ideological position, but they are taking Islam as their counterpoint. That Islam is rigid, Islam is orthodox, Islam is non-evolving, Islam is so on and so forth. Whereas we as quote unquote Hindus are ever evolving. Islam is a religion. Islam has strict laws, but Hinduism is not a religion. It's a way of life, right? And the way of life could be anything. You could support LGBTQ plus, you could oppose LGBTQ plus. You can believe in one God, you can believe in trillions of gods, and so on and so forth. Everything is within this particular state, whereas Islam doesn't allow it with its normativity. So that's why one of the things which I would say is that we need to explore the unique position Islam has within this secular gaze, you see, and develop it further.
I would like to differ slightly with you on this, because yes, first let me agree with you on the opinion that secularism in all of its manifestations has a unique hostile relationship with Islam. The brand of secularism that gained prominence in Muslimistan, as I have outlined in my presentation, is Kemalism. Everywhere else, it's majoritarian secularism, but in Muslimistan, it's elite secularism. And that elite secularism is very much anti-people. I agree with that. The second bit, I think it's possible also to produce our own secularism that might not satisfy some of the Islamist desires, but it's also it also opens up certain pathways to challenge the status quo. So in my view, I would claim that what Islamists, so many of the people who claim themselves to be Islamists, they actually don't know that they are actually what can be called indigenous secularists. So as I said, so Britain is secular, but it has Anglican Church, right? So what the Islamists want, they want Islam as the state religion, right? But if you look at their program, it's very secular. Well, so, and all they're trying to do, most of the time, not every one of them, I would certainly not claim that, but at least the mainstream ones, they're trying to accommodate the dominant religion of the land in the secular system. While Hallak, for example, has called this attempt to create an Islamic state as impossible state, well, he might be right, but he also fails, in my view, somewhat to recognize the double marginalization of Islam in Muslim land. So even that attempt to create perhaps an Islamic, for the lack of a better term, an Islamic secular state is thwarted, right? Let alone the Islamic impossible state. So I think we can challenge the status quo by trying to create an Islamic, or at least Muslim alternative, a Muslim secularism. For example, Bangladesh can have Bismillah in its constitution, Islam as the state religion, and still be secular. We still have to develop this sort of ideas. If India can have Diwali, Saraswati, and Jana Gana Mana, very deeply religious themes, and still be secular, and if secular France can have Notre Dame as its national treasure, so can Bangladesh vis-a-vis Islam and Bismillah and so on, inshallah. For example.
Okay. Right, with that, we're closing our Q&A section tonight. Our next webinar is on Monday, 6th February, on the topic Decolonizing the Mind by Sandeep Hira, who is one of the authorities in this field. The webinar will be followed by a 7-part lecture series on applied multiplexity, Ibn Khaldun as an example. This series will be delivered by Professor Dr. Rezep Shantur, who is one of the leading scholars in this field, and in the field of social science and Ibn Khaldun. This lecture series will start from Tuesday, 7th February. More information will be shared in our WhatsApp group, so if you haven't joined in yet, please feel free to do so. The link has already been shared. We thank Fahim for the presentation, taking time, preparing it, delivering it tonight, and answering all the questions. We also thank you all for taking part and making valuable comments and contributions. We are very much looking forward to seeing you in our next webinar on 7th February. With that, we're closing our session tonight. Goodbye, everyone. Thank you for joining with us.